to destroy the rebels from out of us before we go into Canaan. And then we can read as we continue, But if ye through the Spirit do mortify the deeds of the body, ye shall live. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, they are the sons of God. So who's leading? The Spirit needs to lead, not the flesh. For we have not received the spirit of bondage again. And I really want to emphasize this little word here. When we are battling with the flesh, never think that you're going back into bondage. Because when you really want to do something in the flesh and you can't, does that feel like you're in bondage? Does it? If you really want to do something and you can't, like a prisoner, he really wants to get out of the prison, but he can't. And so we really want to obey the flesh, but to be an Israelite of God, we can't do it. And this is the problem with the mixed multitude. They thought they came into the wilderness to be in bondage. They thought that to come in to obey God was actually all restrictions, and that they were actually going to be killed. There's no worse bondage than the bondage of death. You can't get out of that. And God is saying, I haven't given you the spirit of bondage again. You've already been in bondage. I haven't brought you in the wilderness to be in bondage, but to get rid of the flesh. So when you come into the church and there's all the restrictions, never think that that's bondage. Never, ever think that. In fact, if you think that, it's the flesh that is thinking. Because God's church, with all its restrictions, are only there to purge out your rebels so you can have absolute freedom in the kingdom of heaven. Never think that there's so much restriction in God's church. In Jeremiah 39 and verse 7 and 18, we won't look it up, but it talks about you revolt in your heart and you are rebellious in your heart, and actually, no, it's not the one on. Yeah, we will actually look this one up. This is a different one I was thinking. Sorry, Jeremiah 39, 17 and 18, because He hasn't given us the bondage to fear. We aren't back in Egypt when we have these feelings of restriction, and especially if we get reproved, we think, oh, I'm in restriction and now I'm being reproved. That must be a whip, and we automatically think, how dare someone reprove me? I'm free now. But there is a certain amount of control in the wilderness, but it wasn't bondage. But I will deliver thee in that day, saith the Lord. Thou shalt not be given to the hand of the men of whom thou art afraid, for I will surely deliver thee. Is that deliverance from Egypt? It is. But notice what it says afterwards. And thou shalt not fall by the sword, but thy life shall be for a prey unto thee, because thou hast put the trust in me, saith the Lord. So although Egypt, in the sense of a nation, has been destroyed, you are out of bondage, is there something that will still prey on you as you go? What does the Bible say? Your life shall be a prey unto thee. Your own life will be trying to chase you down. Your own body is going to be your stumbling block. Your own feelings and emotions are going to be your problem. That's what he's saying. I can destroy Satan at the cross and all these other problems, but you're going to have this prey. And when there is a prey, there needs to be a wall of protection. And that wall of protection is God's church, God's commandments, God's law, God's standard. And that isn't bondage, it's safety. But when we go into the wall, we get this claustrophobia, thinking, oh, this is Egypt again. And it's not. And this is the problem that happened in the wilderness with the children of the mixed multitude and some of the children of Israel. And they thought, this is worse than Egypt, in fact. So how does rebellion show itself? The fool says where? In his heart. In his heart, no God. So there is a passive and an active rebellion. Jesus gives a parable of two sons, and he says, he went to one son, he said, "Will you come and work in my vineyard?" And he says, "No." "Oh, I'll go ask my other son. Will you go work in my vineyard?" And he says, "Yes." But the one that said yes never went, and the one that said no went. Who had rebellion? They both did, but whose was in the heart? The one that never actually went, because God, the guy was obedient. He obviously had a renewed heart. He had repentance and so on, and did what his father asked. And so we all are rebellious. We all can say no to God in our former life. But now, will we continue to have rebellion, this secret rebellion, as we come through the wilderness, to say no? There's another, not just saying no, God, but in Psalms 107. We'll read Psalms 107 to see what David writes about this rebellion. And reading in verse 10 and 11. Psalms 107, verse 10 and 11. "Such as sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, being bound in affliction and iron, because they rebelled against the words of God and contemned the counsel of the Most High." The counsel of God. Have you ever seen these books? And it's called The Counsels on Diets and Foods, The Counsels on Welfare Ministry, The Counsels to Pastors and Teachers, The Counsels to Parents, The Counsels of Education, The Counsels on... And do you rebel against them? How many books have the word counsel in it? The counsel of the Most High. The testimony of Jesus. And we rebel against that. They have rebelled against God's words, the scriptures, and his counsel. Do you ever find reading the counsels to ministers or whatever perhaps you read as being, "Ooh, this is a little hard. This is a little bit of bondage. This is too hard for me"? Well, if that's the case, you will be sitting in darkness. You will be in bondage if you don't listen to God's counsel, as it says there in verse 10. "Such as sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, being bound in affliction and iron, because they rebelled against this counsel." You rebel against the counsel of God, you will be sent back to Egypt. No, actually, in fact, you won't be sent back to Egypt, you'll be sent to death. That's what you'll be sent to. Positive death. Darkness. If there was a man walking in the blackest of midnight through the craggy mountains, and there was these big cavities and rocks and big pitfalls and cliffs and canyons, and it was the blackest of midnight, he couldn't even see his nose. There was no stars, no moon, no sun, nothing at all. In fact, he didn't even know he was around the craggy mountains because he couldn't even see anything except the rough stones under his feet. And this poor man was hungry and bruised and bleeding, and he couldn't see anywhere. What would be the best gift to give this man? A light. That is the best gift to give this man. But read in Job 24. Job chapter 24. And reading in verse 13. They are those that rebel against the light. They know not the ways thereof, nor abide in the paths thereof. They rebel against the light. What a man would do such a thing if he's in such a dire straight condition in the dark and a man gives him a light to say, "No, I don't need that." What folly. What absolute folly. But yet the vast majority do it, to rebel against the light. We all know John 3:16, this gift of Jesus Christ. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. And then if you read down further in verse 19, it says, "And this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness